waitress spilled coffee on a Hells Angels member's jacket, but his reaction left everyone speechless. The morning sun, still hesitant, cast long, anemic shadows across the worn linoleum floor of the Rusty Spoon diner. It was a place where time seemed to have paused somewhere in the late 1970s, a relic of chrome and formica, perpetually smelling of stale coffee, sizzling bacon, and something vaguely metallic from the ancient griddle. Every booth was a testament to countless breakfasts and hushed conversations, their red vinyl seats cracked and patched in places, telling silent stories of generations of regulars. The air inside, thick with the comforting hum of the extractor fan and the clatter of ceramic plates, offered a familiar, almost ritualistic start to the day for its patrons. Sarah Jenkins, a waitress whose cheerfulness often felt like a carefully constructed facade against the relentless demands of her job, moved with the practiced grace of someone who had spent too many years balancing trays and navigating tight spaces. She was in her late 20s, her blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, a few rebellious strands always escaping to frame a face that usually held a weary but determined smile. Today, however, the smile felt thinner, stretched taut across a jaw that ached from grinding her teeth in her sleep. The bills were piling up, and her car had decided to stage a dramatic protest, refusing to start that very morning, adding another layer of stress to an already precarious existence. She relied on tips, on the kindness of strangers and the regularity of her regulars, to keep her head above water. Each coffee poured, each order taken, was a small victory against the tide of her financial anxieties. The breakfast rush was in full swing, a symphony of murmurs and mastication. Truckers, local construction workers, a smattering of retirees nursing their bottomless cups of coffee, they all filled the booths and counter stools, their voices blending into a comfortable, low roar. Sarah was expertly refilling a coffee mug for old Mr. Henderson, whose daily order of 2 eggs over easy and rye toast was as predictable as the sunrise, when the diner's entrance bell chimed with an unusual, almost ominous resonance. Every head at the counter swiveled, every conversation momentarily died, and even the clatter from the kitchen seemed to pause. Standing framed in the doorway, momentarily silhouetted against the pale morning light, was a figure that commanded immediate, unsettling attention. He was a man of impressive, almost intimidating stature, broad-shouldered and radiating an aura that silenced the room more effectively than any shouted command. His head was bald, gleaming faintly under the diner's fluorescent lights, and adorned with a thick, salt and pepper beard that cascaded down his chest like a rugged waterfall. But it was his attire that truly announced his presence. He wore a heavy, black leather vest, meticulously adorned with an array of patches that left no doubt as to his affiliation. The most prominent, emblazoned across his back in stark white and red, was the iconic Hells Angels Death's Head logo. Below it, other patches declared his chapter and rank, each one a symbol of a brotherhood known more for its fearsome reputation than its morning coffee habits. He moved with a slow, deliberate cadence, his heavy boots thudding softly on the linoleum, a sound that seemed amplified in the sudden, profound silence of the diner. His eyes, partially obscured by dark sunglasses, scanned the room, giving nothing away, yet missing nothing. A palpable tension settled over the diners, a collective holding of breath. Forks paused mid-air, conversations remained unfinished, and the gentle clinking of cups against saucers ceased entirely. It was the kind of silence that wasn't peaceful, but rather pregnant with unspoken questions and underlying apprehension. Sarah felt a familiar tightening in her stomach, a cold knot of anxiety. She had seen bikers before, even members of various clubs, pass through the Rusty Spoon. It was a common stop on the highway. But never one quite so imposing, so unequivocally, Hells Angels. Her hands, usually steady, trembled slightly as she placed Mr. Henderson's refilled mug back on its saucer. She risked a quick glance at the biker, who had now chosen a booth at the far end of the diner, tucked away in a corner, offering him a clear view of the entire room. He slid into the booth with surprising ease for a man of his size, the leather of his vest creaking softly as he settled. His gaze, even behind the dark lenses, felt heavy, like a physical weight pressing down on her. "Sarah," Mr. Henderson whispered, his voice barely audible, a hoarse rasp. "You all right, honey?" She forced a smile, a shaky imitation of her usual cheer. "Just fine, Mr. Henderson. Just fine." She knew she had to approach him. It was her job. Her livelihood. Every nerve ending screamed at her to turn and run, to pretend she hadn't seen him, but the ingrained professionalism of years took over. She grabbed a small menu and a fresh pot of coffee, its dark, aromatic contents steaming gently, a familiar comfort in a suddenly unfamiliar situation. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the room. Each step towards his booth felt monumental, her legs stiff, her movements unnaturally slow. She could feel the eyes of every other patron on her, a collective gaze of apprehension and morbid curiosity. They were all watching, waiting to see what would happen, as if she were stepping onto a stage. The air crackled with unspoken tension, every breath held, every sound magnified. The scent of coffee, usually a source of comfort, now seemed to mock her, its warmth a stark contrast to the icy fear that had gripped her. As she reached the booth, she cleared her throat, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Morning," she said, projecting a professional calm she didn't feel. "What can I get for you?" The biker remained still, his head tilted slightly, as if evaluating her. He didn't remove his sunglasses, and his expression remained unreadable, hidden beneath the thick beard and the shadow of his brow. He simply raised a large, calloused hand and pointed a thick finger at the menu she held. "Just a black coffee," he rumbled, his voice a low growl, surprisingly deep but not overtly threatening. "And a stack of pancakes. No syrup. Just butter." Sarah nodded, relief washing over her in a small, tentative wave. A simple order. Nothing out of the ordinary. She scribbled it down on her pad, her hand still trembling slightly. "Coming right up," she said, turning to retreat to the sanctuary of the kitchen. She busied herself with other orders, her movements quick and efficient, trying to shake off the lingering sense of unease. The other customers slowly began to resume their conversations, albeit in hushed tones, their eyes still occasionally darting towards the corner booth where the Hells Angels member sat in silent contemplation. The hum of the diner gradually returned, a gentle current of normalcy attempting to reassert itself. Sarah made his coffee, a fresh pot, brewed strong and black, just as he'd requested. She poured it carefully into a thick ceramic mug, the steam rising in delicate tendrils. She placed it on a small tray, along with the butter and a clean napkin. Taking a deep breath, she walked back towards his booth, her gaze fixed on the task, determined not to stumble, not to draw any more attention to herself or to him. This was just another order. Just another customer. As she approached, she reached out to place the mug on the table, her hand extended, her fingers wrapped around the warm ceramic. Her focus was absolute, her concentration intense, yet in that crucial moment, fate, or perhaps just her own frayed nerves, intervened. A slight tremor, a sudden, inexplicable wobble, perhaps her shoe catching momentarily on a loose piece of linoleum, or simply the accumulated stress of her morning finally manifesting. Whatever the cause, her grip faltered. The heavy ceramic mug, brimming with scalding hot, fresh brewed coffee, tipped precariously. Time seemed to slow to an agonizing crawl. Sarah watched in horror as the dark liquid sloshed over the rim, a dark, viscous wave. Her gasp was swallowed by the sudden, sharp intake of breath from the few patrons who were still watching. The coffee, a dark, steaming torrent, didn't just spill onto the table. It arced directly, unerringly, onto the Hells Angels member's left shoulder, soaking into the thick, pristine black leather of his vest. A dark, expanding stain bloomed instantly across the intricate stitching of one of his most prominent patches, right over the Hells Angels lettering. The heat of the liquid, visible as a wisp of steam rising from the leather, was undeniable. The aroma of bitter coffee filled the air around them, suddenly acrid and potent. Sarah froze, her hand still hovering uselessly over the now half-empty mug, her eyes wide with a terror that transcended mere embarrassment. Her mind screamed, a cacophony of worst-case scenarios. She had just spilled hot coffee on a Hells Angels member. Not just on him, but on his cut, his colors, the sacred emblem of his brotherhood. This wasn't just a spilled drink, this felt like an act of aggression, an unforgivable offense. Her heart plummeted, a cold, heavy stone in her chest. Every story she had ever heard, every whispered warning about the unforgiving nature of such clubs, flashed through her mind in vivid, terrifying detail. She imagined the retribution, the anger, the sheer, unbridled fury that was surely about to erupt. The entire diner went silent again, a silence far more profound and chilling than before. Every eye was now glued to their corner booth, every muscle tensed, every breath held in collective suspense. The clatter from the kitchen had ceased entirely. Even the hum of the extractor fan seemed to have faded. The air was thick, heavy, almost suffocating, charged with an electricity of fear and anticipation. The Hells Angels member remained perfectly still, a statue carved from granite and leather. He didn't flinch, didn't make a sound. Only a faint wisp of steam continued to rise from the dark stain spreading across his shoulder. Sarah couldn't tear her eyes away from the patch, from the dark, wet sheen of the leather, from the visible heat radiating from the spilled coffee. She just stood there, paralyzed, a pathetic, trembling figure, waiting for the inevitable explosion. Her hands were clammy, her knees felt like jelly, and a cold sweat broke out on her forehead. She could feel the blood draining from her face, leaving her ghostly pale. He slowly, deliberately, reached up with his right hand. Sarah's breath hitched. This was it. The moment of reckoning. She braced herself, her eyes squeezed shut for a split second, anticipating a shout, a violent movement, anything to break the suffocating silence. But when she opened her eyes, he wasn't reaching for her, or for something to wipe the spill. Instead, his large, calloused fingers slowly, almost delicately, pushed his dark sunglasses up onto his forehead, revealing his eyes. They were a startling shade of blue, framed by a network of fine lines at the corners, clearly visible now. And in those blue eyes, there was no anger. No fury. No menace. Instead, there was something else entirely. Something that Sarah, and indeed every single person in the Rusty Spoon diner, had absolutely not expected. His gaze, now direct and unshielded, held a peculiar, almost unreadable expression. He looked from the coffee stain on his jacket, down to Sarah's terrified face, then slowly, around the hushed, expectant faces of the other patrons. The silence stretched, elongated, becoming an almost unbearable pressure. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the storm to break, waiting for the legendary temper to ignite. The seconds ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity, amplifying the tension to an almost unbearable degree. The entire diner was a tableau of frozen fear, a collective gasp held in suspended animation. Yet, the Hells Angels member remained unmoving, his blue eyes taking in the scene, his expression still bafflingly devoid of the rage everyone anticipated. The Hells Angels member slowly lowered his gaze from the silent, terrified faces of the patrons back to Sarah. His blue eyes, surprisingly clear and devoid of malice, seemed to take in her trembling form, the half-empty coffee mug still clutched in her hand, and the dark stain blooming on his vest. A long moment passed, thick with unspoken dread, stretching the silence to an almost unbearable point. Then, a sound, low and guttural, escaped his throat. It wasn't a roar of anger, nor a curse hurled in frustration. It was a sigh. A deep, weary sigh that seemed to carry the weight of countless miles and untold stories, a sound entirely out of place in the charged atmosphere. He leaned back slightly in the booth, the worn red vinyl creaking under his imposing weight, and slowly, deliberately, reached for the napkin on the table. Sarah flinched, her body tensing, every nerve ending screaming for her to brace for impact. She expected him to angrily dab at the stain, perhaps even crumple the napkin and throw it back at her in disgust. Instead, he simply picked it up, folded it neatly, and placed it beside his plate, his movements unhurried, almost serene. He then looked at her again, his blue eyes holding a strange, almost melancholic glint, a depth that hinted at experiences far beyond the diner's humble walls. "Well," he rumbled, his voice still low, but now entirely devoid of the previous hint of menace, "that's a damn shame." Sarah's breath hitched, a sharp, ragged sound in her throat. A damn shame. Not, "you clumsy idiot," or "you owe me a new jacket." Just, a shame. The sheer unexpectedness of his calm, almost resigned response was almost as terrifying as the anger she had anticipated. Her mind, still reeling from the adrenaline surge, struggled to process this new, baffling reality. What was she supposed to say? An apology felt utterly inadequate, yet necessary, a desperate attempt to appease a force she still didn't fully comprehend. I am so sorry, sir, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes still wide with a mixture of fear, confusion, and a burgeoning sense of disbelief. I don't know what happened. My hand just slipped. I'll get you another coffee. And I'll pay for the dry cleaning, whatever it takes, please, I'm so sorry. The words tumbled out in a frantic, desperate plea for forgiveness, for understanding, for anything that might avert the lingering sense of catastrophe. She was practically begging, her entire being focused on mollifying this imposing figure who, against all odds, seemed to be exhibiting an almost unsettling patience. The image of her car, stubbornly refusing to start that morning, flashed through her mind, a stark reminder of the depth of her financial anxieties. This incident, on top of everything else, felt like the final straw. The biker watched her, his expression still unreadable, but the intensity in his blue eyes seemed to soften, just a fraction. He slowly shook his head, a slight, almost imperceptible movement that conveyed a quiet understanding. Dry cleaning ain't gonna do much for that, honey, he said, his voice a little softer now, a hint of something akin to resignation, or perhaps just pragmatism, in his tone. He gestured vaguely at the dark, spreading stain on his vest, which now seemed to be permanently etched into the thick leather. Leather's a tricky beast. Once it's soaked like that, especially with hot coffee, it's pretty much a permanent souvenir. A permanent souvenir. The words echoed in Sarah's mind, a fresh, cold wave of despair washing over her. A permanent stain on his Hell's Angels vest. This was worse than she thought. Her already precarious financial situation, burdened by mounting bills and a stubbornly broken car, now felt like it was crumbling entirely, leaving her adrift in a sea of insurmountable debt. How much did one of those vests cost? She imagined hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars, a custom-made item, steeped in club history and personal meaning, an irreplaceable symbol. The thought made her stomach churn, a bitter taste rising in her mouth. Her tips for the next month, perhaps even longer, wouldn't even begin to cover it. The sheer impossibility of the situation threatened to overwhelm her. Oh, God, she whispered, her voice cracking, barely audible above the renewed, though still hushed, murmurs from the other tables. I don't know what to say. I don't have that kind of money. I truly don't. Please, is there anything at all I can do? Her eyes pleaded with him, searching for any flicker of understanding, any sign of leniency in that stoic face. The silence in the diner was still absolute for most, every patron hanging on every word, every subtle shift in the biker's expression. They too were struggling to reconcile the fearsome legend with the surprisingly calm, almost philosophical man before them. The biker leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table, his gaze steady and unwavering on Sarah. He still didn't display anger, but there was a seriousness in his eyes that commanded absolute attention, cutting through the lingering fear. Calm down, sweetheart, he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that somehow managed to be both firm and strangely reassuring, a deep resonance that settled over the room. Nobody's asking you for money. And nobody's gonna hurt you. The words, so utterly contrary to everyone's expectations, hung in the air, a shocking revelation that resonated through the entire diner. A collective, almost imperceptible gasp rippled through the room, followed by a rush of exhaled breaths. Sarah herself felt a sudden, dizzying wave of relief, so profound it almost buckled her knees, threatening to send her sprawling onto the worn linoleum. No money. No harm. It was too good to be true. Her mind, however, still clung to the ingrained fear and suspicion. This was a Hell's Angel. There had to be a catch. There always was. He continued, his voice maintaining that steady, calm tone, his blue eyes never leaving hers. Accidents happen. You're busy, you're running around. I get it. And frankly, he paused, a faint, almost imperceptible twitch at the corner of his lips, a hint of dry amusement, this old thing has seen worse. A lot worse. He gave a small, almost dismissive shrug, as if to truly downplay the significance of the coffee stain on his sacred vest, a garment that most would consider inviolable. The gesture was so unexpected, so casual, that it further deepened the mystery surrounding him. Sarah stared at him, bewildered, her initial terror slowly giving way to a profound sense of confusion. This was not the feared, ruthless Hell's Angel she, and everyone else, had conjured in their minds. This was a man. A surprisingly understanding, almost compassionate man. The shock of this realization slowly began to replace the raw terror, but the confusion remained, a persistent hum in her brain. Why was he being so lenient? Was this a test? A prelude to something far more sinister, a psychological game before the true hammer fell? He then looked around the diner, his gaze sweeping over the astonished, still slightly tense faces of the other customers. A few quickly averted their eyes, while others remained openly staring, their mouths agape. "All right, folks," he announced, his voice carrying just enough authority to cut through the lingering silence and the hushed whispers that had begun to rise. "Show's over. Get back to your breakfasts." Slowly, hesitantly, the other patrons began to stir. A few whispered conversations resumed, still hushed, still laced with disbelief and a palpable sense of shared wonder. Forks began to clink against plates again, the familiar sounds of the diner gradually returning, albeit with a palpable undercurrent of bewildered chatter and speculative glances towards the corner booth. Old Mr. Henderson, whose face had been ashen with worry, let out a shaky breath he hadn't realized he was holding, a single tear tracing a path down his wrinkled cheek. "Now, about those pancakes," the biker said, turning his attention back to Sarah, a faint, almost mischievous glint in his startling blue eyes, a flicker of something almost human. "They still coming? And maybe a fresh coffee, this time in a mug that stays upright." A nervous, almost disbelieving laugh escaped Sarah, a fragile sound that cracked the remaining tension in the air. Her knees, still wobbly, threatened to give out completely. "Yes, sir," she managed, her voice still thin but tinged with a newfound, exhilarating relief. "Pancakes are coming. And a fresh coffee, absolutely." She turned quickly, practically fleeing towards the kitchen, the mug still clutched in her hand, her mind a whirlwind of confusion, disbelief, and a profound, dizzying sense of reprieve. The kitchen, usually a chaotic symphony of sizzling and shouting, felt like a sanctuary. She leaned against the stainless steel counter, taking deep, ragged breaths, trying to ground herself. Her colleague, Mike, the grizzled short-order cook, looked at her with wide, incredulous eyes. "Sarah, what in God's name just happened out there?" he whispered, his voice hushed. "I thought you were a goner. I thought we were all goner." I don't know, Mike," she stammered, shaking her head. He's not mad. He said it was a damn shame and accidents happen. And he wants pancakes." She held up the half-empty mug, a silent testament to the near catastrophe. Mike just stared, a spatula frozen mid-air, his jaw slack. The entire kitchen staff, who had been peeking through the service window, exchanged bewildered glances. Sarah forced herself to move, her hands still trembling but her movements gaining a semblance of their usual efficiency. She poured a new cup of coffee, her focus absolute, determined not to let another drop spill. While Mike started on the pancakes, she retrieved the fresh coffee and a small bottle of maple syrup, despite his request for no syrup. Perhaps he'd change his mind, or perhaps it was simply her ingrained habit of offering options. With a deep breath that did little to steady her racing heart, she walked back to the corner booth. The diner had resumed its low hum of conversation, but it was clear that every patron was still acutely aware of the biker's presence, and of Sarah's every move. Their eyes followed her, a mixture of awe and lingering apprehension. She placed the fresh coffee mug on the table, carefully this time, then the small syrup bottle. "Your coffee, sir," she said, her voice stronger now, though still softer than usual. "And the pancakes will be right out." He looked up, his blue eyes, still unshielded by the sunglasses, met hers. There was a flicker of something in them, not quite a smile, but a softening, a hint of recognition. "Thank you, sweetheart," he rumbled, picking up the mug and taking a slow, appreciative sip. "This is perfect." He then glanced at the small bottle of syrup. "You brought syrup, even though I said no." It wasn't a question, or an accusation, just an observation, his tone neutral. Sarah felt a blush creep up her neck. Just in case, she murmured, feeling foolish. Sometimes people change their minds. He chuckled then, a low, guttural sound that surprised her again. It wasn't menacing, but deep and genuine. "Smart girl," he said, and for the first time, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of his lips, hidden beneath the thick beard. "Always plan for contingencies. That's a good quality." Mike arrived then, placing a towering stack of golden brown pancakes in front of the biker, along with a generous pat of butter. The aroma of warm flour and melting butter filled the small area. The biker nodded his approval to Mike, who quickly retreated, still looking like he'd seen a ghost. The biker cut into the pancakes, his large hand deftly operating the fork and knife. He ate slowly, deliberately, as if savoring each bite. Sarah, still hovering nearby, felt an awkward silence descend. She wanted to leave, but felt compelled to stay, as if waiting for a shoe to drop, or for him to finally reveal the catch. After a few more bites, he looked up again, his blue eyes fixed on her. "You seem like a good kid, Sarah," he said, his voice softer, more conversational. "Hardworking. Got that look in your eyes, though. Like you're carrying the weight of the world." Sarah flinched, surprised by his perceptiveness. She usually kept her struggles well hidden beneath her cheerful facade. It's just been a rough week, sir," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Car broke down this morning. Bills are piling up." The words tumbled out before she could stop them, a sudden, unexpected confession to a man who, moments ago, had been the embodiment of her worst fears. He nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful. "Life hits hard sometimes," he observed, taking another bite of pancake. "I know a thing or two about that. Used to be a mechanic, before I found a different path." He gestured vaguely at his vest, a brief, almost wistful expression crossing his face. "Know my way around an engine. What kind of car you got?" Sarah blinked, completely taken aback. "A '98 Honda Civic," she replied, the details spilling out. "It just stopped. No warning. Tow truck driver said it sounded like the starter, but I don't have the money for repairs right now." He listened intently, chewing slowly. "Starter, huh?" he mused, then took a long sip of coffee. "Tell you what, Sarah. You spilled coffee on my vest. It's a permanent souvenir, like I said. But maybe I can get you a permanent solution for your car." Sarah stared, her mouth slightly agape. What do you mean?" He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a confidential rumble. "My club, we got a network. Guys who know things. Guys who can fix things. And sometimes," he paused, a knowing glint in his blue eyes, "we like to help out people who deserve it. You seem like you deserve it. Consider it an apology for scaring the hell out of you, and a new kind of dry cleaning for this old vest." He gestured to the stained leather. Sarah's mind reeled. He was offering to fix her car. For free. A Hell's Angel. It sounded utterly unbelievable, yet his steady gaze and calm demeanor gave his words an undeniable weight. "Sir, I can't ask you to do that," she stammered, feeling a fresh wave of embarrassment and gratitude. "It's too much. I was the one who spilled the coffee." He waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense. An accident. Like I said, this vest has seen worse. And a broken down car? That's a real problem. A problem I can help with. Just tell me where it's parked. And give me your number. Someone will be in touch." He pulled out a small notepad and a pen from an inner pocket of his vest, sliding them across the table towards her. Reluctantly, still half expecting a trick, Sarah scribbled down her name, phone number, and the precise location of her car in the diner's parking lot. Her hand still trembled, but this time it was from a mixture of shock, hope, and an overwhelming sense of relief. He took the notepad back, tucking it away. "Good. Now, about those bills, he continued, his voice still low, indicating he wasn't finished. You said they were piling up. What kind of bills? Sarah hesitated, feeling a fresh wave of vulnerability. Rent, mostly, she admitted, her voice barely audible. And medical bills from an old injury. Nothing too major, just enough to keep me constantly stressed. He nodded slowly. Medical bills are a particular kind of hell, he agreed, a shadow passing over his eyes, a fleeting glimpse into a past she couldn't fathom. Tell you what. You tell me what you need to get caught up, and consider it covered. No strings attached. Just a good deed. Sometimes, even hell's angels do them. He pulled out a thick wad of cash from his wallet, far more than she'd ever seen outside of a bank, and placed it on the table. This should cover it, and then some. Don't argue. Just take it. And keep serving those pancakes. Sarah's eyes widened, staring at the stack of bills on the table. It was hundreds, maybe even $1,000. Her breath hitched. This was beyond anything she could have imagined. Her car, her bills, all of it, suddenly, miraculously, within reach of being resolved. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring her vision. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. I can't accept all of this. He leaned back, a small, almost imperceptible smile finally gracing his lips. You already have. Don't worry about it. Just pay it forward when you can. That's how the world keeps turning, even for us, bad guys. He picked up his fork again, gesturing with it towards the cash. Now, go on. Take it. And let me finish these damn good pancakes. Still in a daze, Sarah reached out, her fingers brushing against the crisp bills. She picked up the stack, her hand shaking. It felt surreal, like a dream. She tucked it into her apron pocket, her mind still struggling to process the enormity of his generosity. Thank you, she managed, her voice thick with tears. Thank you so much. You have no idea what this means to me. He simply nodded, his blue eyes holding a depth of understanding that went beyond words. I think I might have an idea, sweetheart. Now, go on. I'm sure there are other hungry folks waiting for their coffee. Sarah, still reeling, finally turned and walked away, the weight of the cash a surreal warmth in her pocket. She felt the eyes of the other patrons on her, their faces reflecting a mixture of astonishment, wonder, and a profound shift in perception. The entire diner had witnessed a transformation, not just of a tense situation, but of an entire narrative. The Hell's Angel, the feared figure, had become an unexpected angel of mercy. Over the next few days, true to his word, the miracle unfolded. The very next morning, a beat-up but well-maintained pickup truck, emblazoned with a discreet, almost unnoticeable club logo, pulled into the Rusty Spoon's parking lot. Two burly men, also wearing leather vests, though without the prominent Hell's Angels insignia, emerged. They greeted Sarah with surprising politeness, asked for her car keys, and within an hour, her old Honda Civic was purring like new. The starter had been replaced, and they'd even topped off her fluids and checked her tires, all without a word about payment. Sarah, overwhelmed with gratitude, tried to offer them coffee and a meal, but they politely declined, simply saying, "Our brother said you were taken care of. Just keep being you, waitress." They left as quickly and quietly as they arrived, leaving Sarah staring at her fully functional car, a wave of relief so intense it brought fresh tears to her eyes. With the money he had given her, she paid off her overdue rent, settled the lingering medical bills, and even had enough left over to put a decent down payment on a new set of tires she desperately needed. The crushing weight of financial anxiety, which had been pressing down on her for months, lifted, replaced by a lightness she hadn't felt in years. Her smile, once a carefully constructed facade, now felt genuine, radiating from a place of true contentment. The Hell's Angels member, whose name she never learned, became a regular at the Rusty Spoon, though he was never as intimidating as he had been on that first morning. He always sat in the same corner booth, always ordered black coffee and pancakes with butter, and always offered a quiet nod or a knowing glance to Sarah. He never mentioned the coffee stain on his vest again, though it remained a dark, permanent testament to the day he had turned terror into unexpected grace. His presence, initially a source of apprehension, gradually became a curious, almost comforting fixture. The other patrons, too, slowly adjusted. The hushed conversations and wary glances were replaced by a quiet respect, a subtle acknowledgement of the man who defied expectations. He was still a Hell's Angel, still an imposing figure, but now he was also the man who had shown immense kindness to their beloved waitress. Sarah, no longer merely surviving, found a renewed spring in her step. The fear had been replaced by a quiet confidence, the stress by a profound sense of gratitude. The Rusty Spoon Diner, a place where time usually stood still, had, for one electrifying morning, become a stage for an extraordinary lesson in humanity, a powerful reminder that kindness, compassion, and unexpected generosity could bloom in the most unlikely of places, from the most unexpected of people, forever changing the lives it touched. And every time Sarah poured a cup of coffee, she remembered the man with the startling blue eyes and the permanently stained leather vest, a silent guardian angel who taught her that even in the toughest of exteriors, the heart of gold could shine the brightest.